Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099, and I wanted to talk to you about a book that I finished reading earlier this week, Essential Spider-Woman Volume 1. If you recall, at the beginning of this month, I had a challenge set forth for myself to read one fat graphic novel every week, and this week I read Essential Spider-Woman Volume 1. If you've been keeping up with my Facebook page, I have been making statuses about each issue of this book as I was reading it. So that is another reason that you should go and check out the Facebook page. I'm linking to it in the description of this video. Go check it out because I am always doing cool stuff there that I'm not doing here on the actual videos. As for this book, and if you haven't seen my Facebook page, then you don't know how I felt about each individual issue, I'm going to say this book qualifies more as an interesting failure. It's comprised of 3 runs. The first, actually I guess technically 4 writers are on this book. The first issue is Marvel Spotlight issue 32. That's written by Archie Goodwin, and that's the only issue of Spider-Woman that he wrote. And that issue has Spider-Woman. She's an agent of Hydra, and she finds out at the end of that issue that she is a highly evolved spider created by the High Evolutionary. The very next time that she appears is in a string of 6 issues in Marvel Team Up, where she's teaming up with The Thing. I think briefly she teams up with Shang-Chi, and then Modred is a character, not to be confused with Mordred. Modred, a very similar name. A few different characters, The Thing being the most prominent one, and those issues are written by Marv Wolfman. And it seems to me, I talked a little bit about this on the Facebook page when I was talking about each issue, it seems like Marv Wolfman really hated her origin story that was given by Archie Goodwin in the Marvel Spotlight issue, because almost immediately he retcons that and says, no, she's not a highly evolved spider, she's actually a human being with spider-like attributes. And then there's what I like to think is a little bit more of a complicated origin story, not much, but it is more complicated than the origin story that Archie Goodwin gave. And then she gets her own series, and that lasts for about 8 issues, and then Marv Wolfman leaves, I assume, to go and write Teen Titans at DC Comics, because this was the very late 70s, and by the time you get to the end of the book, it's already in the early 1980s, and Marv Wolfman started Teen Titans in 1980, so I'm assuming just as soon as he left Spider-Woman, he went to go write Teen Titans. After Marv Wolfman leaves, Mark Gruenwald writes the book for 12 issues, and I've talked a little bit about Mark Gruenwald before. I'm a big fan of his. And then after Gruenwald, we have another author who I am not familiar with, Michael Fleischer, and he writes the rest of this book. And I don't know how long his run lasted. There is an Essential Spider-Woman Volume 2, but I don't know how long his run on Spider-Woman lasted. Like I said, this book is a very interesting failure, because what's going on here is that each writer basically completely tears apart what the previous writer set up, and they try to do their own thing. Like I said, Marv Wolfman seemingly really hates what Archie Goodwin set up with the character. He had her as an agent of Hydra and a highly evolved spider. Seemingly, once she gains independence and is no longer working for Hydra, that would be a good premise for a series. Have Spider-Woman fighting Hydra at every turn. That would be a pretty decent series, and you have an unlimited amount of bad guys that you can keep using. But then Wolfman completely ignores Hydra. He completely ignores the origin story. He creates a brand new origin story, and then he has to create a whole bunch of new villains since he's no longer using Hydra as the built-in villains for this series. And he does an okay job. He has a couple of mystical villains. Brothers Grimm, the Needle, I think, is in there with Wolfman stuff. Maybe that was Gruenwald, I don't remember. And then he has Morgan Le Fay for 2 issues, and then he sets up some supporting characters who, they're okay. Magnus is an immortal magician who is a student of Morgan Le Fay, and Jerry Hunt is an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. who, as soon as he sees Spider-Woman, he is instantly in love with her. And that's easily one of the worst parts of Wolfman's run, is the romance between Spider-Woman and Jerry Hunt. Because as soon as these two people meet each other, it's like, ooh, we're in love, and they start kissing. It's incredibly fake, very unbelievable. If I was going to want these two to be in a romance with each other, I would want them to get to know each other for like a year or 2 of comic books before they start making out. And As a result, this relationship feels incredibly fake, and so by the time Wolfman leaves around issue 8, Mark Gruenwald, like I said, he starts getting rid of everything that Wolfman set up. He gets rid of the mentor figure Magnus. He has him move back to Great Britain. He gets rid of Jerry Hunt, who, honestly, good riddance. I didn't need him as a boyfriend. I talked about this on the Facebook page a little bit. I would have been fine with him staying on as a platonic ally. I think that could have been a great strength to this series if Gruenwald had kept Jerry Hunt on as an ally. But I really did not like him as a boyfriend, and seemingly Mark Gruenwald just didn't think that there was anything redeemable about that character at all, so he just got rid of the character entirely. Now, Gruenwald actually has some pretty solid issues in his run, but for the most part, because he spends a fair amount of time tearing apart everything that made this series a series, a lot of his run is basically Spider-Woman teaming up with other characters. You have her teaming up with the Shroud for 3 issues. You have her teaming up with Werewolf by Night for an issue. You have her meeting Spider-Man for an issue. Honestly, I think there's more issues here where she's teaming up with somebody than where she isn't teaming up with somebody. And there's nothing wrong with team-up stories if they are done well. But I think it's very telling that Mark Gruenwald seemingly didn't like anything that Marv Wolfman had set up, and so he's trying to figure out how is this character going to work in her own series, and instead of trying to find a new way for her to work, he's just having her team up with all of these characters in a string of loosely connected events. Now, I want to stress that I really did like Gruenwald's run on this series. I thought there were some really solid issues. There were a few stinkers in there, but there were a few stinkers in each of the runs of this series. So I don't want to say that because he did a few stinkers that his run was bad. I really liked what he did, but it seems to me that Gruenwald was trying to figure out how does this character work as the protagonist of her own series? Who are her supporting characters? Who are her villains? What is the setting of her series going to be? And in fact, the setting, her character being in Los Angeles, is the only thing that is consistent throughout this entire book. Everything else, supporting characters, bad guys, all of that is very inconsistent. Each writer will completely get rid of everything that came before and do their own thing. And that works to varying degrees. Michael Fleischer, he has Spider-Woman capturing villains and bringing them to the chief of police in a sort of Batman Commissioner Gordon type relationship, and then she gets paid for bringing the villains in. Sort of a bounty hunter situation. I don't really think that's how bounty hunters work, but that's okay. And she has a sort of Oracle type sidekick character, more of a partner really, not really a sidekick. I mentioned this on the Facebook page. Her partner in crime is a guy who's wheelchair bound. He wanted to be an FBI agent, and then something happened that put him in a wheelchair, and then he is kind of her brains behind the operation. He is doing all the computer stuff. He's kind of doing a lot of the mental stuff, figuring stuff out, and then she's doing a lot of the legwork. In a lot of ways, he is Oracle before Batgirl was ever crippled and became Oracle herself. This stuff was probably 10 years before Batgirl became Oracle. So I think that's very interesting that in at least one manner, this book is very ahead of its time. But anyway, this last chunk of the book was probably the best run of the book. Now, there were a couple of issues there that I really hated, specifically the stuff with the Games Master, and if you want to know what I'm talking about, go check out my Facebook page. I talk about it at great lengths, what I like and don't like about the Games Master. But I think the one thing that I like the most about Fleischer's run is that he doesn't feel the need to spend 3 or 4 issues trying to find a supporting cast for Jessica, trying to find a new setting for her to work in, trying to find bad guys for her. His very first issue has her capturing bad guys, bringing them to the police, and going and talking to her friend Scotty, the wheelchair guy, and saying, "Hey Scotty, what's up? I just captured some bad guys." He's like, "Cool, I have another case for you to work on." It starts in medias res, and we don't have to spend like 4 issues setting up her status quo. And while I enjoyed bits and pieces of the Wolfman and Gruenwald stuff, one thing I really didn't realize I hated about those issues was that they spent so long setting stuff up, and ultimately it comes to mean absolutely nothing, because in Wolfman's case, he's setting all this stuff up, and then he leaves the series, and then the guy who follows him, he doesn't bother following any of that stuff up, and instead he just kind of gets rid of that stuff that was being set up for 8 or so issues. And then Gruenwald, he's kind of sort of setting stuff up, and then once again, he leaves the series, and then this other guy, he follows him, and he doesn't really follow any of that stuff up. Instead, he wants to do his own thing. I think I would have been much more engaged with the stories of this book if it had been one single writer writing the whole thing. Either Marv Wolfman or Mark Grunwald or Michael Fleischer. If one of those guys had been writing the whole thing, I think this book would have been much more consistent. But as is, 4 writers across 30 issues, that may not seem like a big deal, but that's not a lot of time that each of these guys are spending on this book. And so as is, it feels very jarring each time a new writer comes on board. So I would say, if you are interested in the story aspect of Spider-Woman, I would say this book is going to be a 50-50 shot. You may like it, you may not. If I was just judging this book based on plot, I would say this book probably gets 5 out of 10 stars. And that may sound like kind of a backhanded slap against this book, but honestly, I like this book. I enjoyed a lot about it, even though several of the stories in this book were nothing to write home about, and some of them were even astoundingly bad. I still enjoyed it. You may be asking, okay, why did I enjoy it if this book is only a 5 out of 10? Well, the plot stuff is a 5 out of 10, but I think the thematic stuff going on here is incredibly strong. Even though I said this book feels very inconsistent because there's so many writers on it, the one thing that I think is very consistent, besides the setting being Los Angeles, is the theme of identity. Throughout this whole book, no matter who is writing this thing, all of these writers really are hitting hard the idea of Spider-Woman trying to figure out who she is. When she first starts appearing in this book, she doesn't have any idea who she is. She doesn't even know her real name. By the end of this book, she has sort of found a niche for herself in Los Angeles being a bounty hunter, but I'm sure that's not going to last very long since none of her other careers have really lasted very long either. But I really like this idea of Jessica Drew trying to find herself and trying to figure out who she is and always trying to struggle with this idea of identity. I think that is some incredibly strong writing in this book. And so, if I was judging this book on thematic stuff, I would say this is probably an 8.5 out of 10. But since I usually don't judge things on an out of 10 basis, then you can just take that for what it's worth. So that's about all I have to say about Essential Spider-Woman Volume 1. This may have sounded like I didn't really like it, but I want you to know I did order Volume 2. So even though there was a lot of stuff in this book that I did not like, ultimately it did leave me wanting more. So I am going to be reading Volume 2. I'm very curious to see how that volume turns out, and I will let you guys know how that one turns out whenever I read it and I do a video on it. For that matter, I am about done talking about this book. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for you. I hope I was able to convince you to go and read this book. Or if I convinced you that this book is not something that you would want to read, I hope I was helpful for you in that manner also. In the meantime, that's about all I have to say here. I will be back next week doing some other reviews. I will be back tomorrow doing a review of an episode of Batman Beyond. I may or may not be doing a quick video showing you guys what I did at Free Comic Book Day, which by the time you guys see this video, that's going to be tomorrow, so don't forget that. I may or may not be doing a video showing you guys what I got there. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. Until next week when I'm going to be doing some more reviews, I will see you guys later. In the meantime, have a fantastic rest of the week. I will see you then.